Hello, everyone. In this talk, I just want to give a very brief update around the global surveillance activities. So we've been able to maintain surveillance and monitoring across a very large geographical area, thanks to the network of partners on this. There's been the focus on East Africa and South Asia. You can see probably close to about 10,000 fields across 16 countries being surveyed, and also some blast surveys now starting up in Africa, which I think is important. Also, in terms of data management, thanks to colleagues at Global Rust Reference Center, Aarhus University, the Toolbox has been maintained and expanded. And it really represents an incredibly comprehensive resource for all the data around wheat rust. So probably something like over 63,000 records, 43 countries now in the Toolbox databases. If we look at yellow rust, and just to flag some of the sort of recent things that are happening, through the diagnostic labs, and certainly, like to flag, the role that the Global Rust Reference Center and also the Irrigated Turkey lab at Izmir are doing in this. Being able to track those important races globally, and as you can see, there are many things that are happening, lots of movements going on. Just to flag, I think the PSTS 16 is certainly a real a race of concern. It was picked in Afghanistan, Pakistan, 2018. The end of 2020, it moved into Ethiopia, and it's really expanding rapidly in Ethiopia. No detection yet in Kenya, but almost certainly it will move and expand within East Africa. PSTS 13, I mean, this was first picked in Europe, but it's on a trip around the world. It's been now picked up in Australia. It's taking off there. Also South America, and it's expanding its range there. So we had the first ever report of stripe rust in Paraguay in 2021. PSTS 14, that's also kind of spreading out. So in Iraq in 2020, all the samples were that genotype. Nepal, we've seen very high diversity there. There's a strong signal of a sexual population. And also this ME 2018. It was first picked in Egypt in 2018. It's been recorded in a few countries now around the Mediterranean basin. And then this year, 22, it was picked up in irrigated wheat in Ethiopia. So that's another one we need to be monitoring, keeping a close eye on. Thinking about Nepal, 21-22 season, there's a very severe stripe rust outbreak that covered pretty much all the western hills in Nepal. It was old varieties that were highly susceptible, and you can see the photos that were taken by Dr. Dapper in Nepal. And really, if there's a critical need for variety replacement in those mid-hill areas in Nepal. As I mentioned previously, there's very high genetic diversity we're seeing in the samples from Nepal. So we're still working to really identify what was the causal race behind this outbreak. For stem rust, also many developments happening globally. Several new UG99 variants appearing in Kenya. One of those variants, TTKTT, is increasing very rapidly in Ethiopia. And there's also first detection of the TTK-TT plus race in Ethiopia as well. In Europe, we're seeing a very rapidly changing situation with stem rust increasing extremely rapidly. And as a result of interactions with barberry, we're seeing some unique virulence combinations coming up, including SR31, which it's nothing to do with UG99. It's independent evolution of that virulence. So just the focus on Europe, stem rust is really increasing very quickly. It seems the only effective genes in the cultivars are 2431 TMP, and those have all been defeated elsewhere. The TKTT race that's increasing very quickly in East Africa has combined virulence against all those resistance genes. In the UK in 2022, it was the highest recorded outbreak of stem rust in several decades on a very wide front, and it looked like it was a spore cloud that was coming in from the south. In East Africa, we'll be continuing the early warning efforts there. So these are now becoming operational, certainly in Ethiopia, and reaching hundreds of thousands of farmers. From an impact assessment, there's clear indications of farmer behavior changed, increased awareness and ability to control rusts, and also important national policy changes around fungicides that are now in place. 2021 season we saw as a real high risk of a big yellow rust epidemic. But thanks to the early warning and the efforts that are happening in Ethiopia, it looks like a major epidemic was prevented, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. So just as a refresher, the early warning system in Ethiopia, we're getting near real-time surveillance in the fields. We've got integrated data hub. We've got automated data harvesting. The model pipeline set up by Cambridge University UK Met Office, fully functional, providing 7-day forecasts back to Ethiopia on a daily basis. We're putting together weekly advisories, the alerts, and being able to get those through to stakeholders and through to hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers. And that's providing a basis for control of the disease in a timely manner. We also worked with colleagues at Aarhus and Cornell to develop this vulnerability mapping tool. So that's combining information on host distribution, susceptibility to specific pathogen races, and also a suitable environment to come up with an indication of areas that are at risk, in this case to the PST-S16 yellow rust race. And that's then corresponding quite closely with surveys that are undertaken later. But we're able to provide the information essentially pre-season. So that's valuable information for planning and decision-making in Ethiopia. I mean, just looking, in Ethiopia, 2010, I mean, it was about as bad as it gets. I mean, a really devastating epidemic occurred across a very wide area with losses, in the order of probably around 250 million US dollars. So 2021, we saw the conditions were in place for another large epidemic. We knew there were large areas planted to susceptible cultivars. We'd got the incursion of this very virulent race, PST-S16. It was taking off very early in the main season in Ethiopia, and the environmental conditions were extremely suitable. So everything was in place that we were at risk of a very large epidemic. The actual outcome in 2021 was very different. The forecast reports we're seeing are indicating probably a record wheat production in Ethiopia for the 21 season, with a minimal level of pests and diseases. And really, I think, you know, the early warning efforts, all the activities around rust control that are now happening in Ethiopia, they're really having a positive effect. And I think those strong indications that these really were helping to prevent the major epidemic like we saw in 2010 in the last season in Ethiopia. Also, another thing I think to flag in Ethiopia is the very rapid expansion of irrigated wheat. I think 2021, the estimates were there's probably around 350,000 hectares planted to irrigated wheat. This is likely to have a big influence on the disease epidemiology for both stem rust and stripe rust. As these areas are going to provide, you know, a green bridge between seasons. So I think there's, you know, strong implications here that we need very good surveillance in these areas, and also very strong rust control measures. We've also got the early warning systems now kind of operational in South Asia. So in Nepal and Bangladesh, we've been working with colleagues there. And we're being able to bring in the forecasting, and we're also being able to reach, you know, hundreds of thousands of farmers with the information. We're also working together with Diane Saunders at the John Innes, and now successfully being able to roll out the Marple Rapid Diagnostics system. So this year we were able to undertake workshops in both Nepal and Kenya, very successful. And in both those countries, we're now seeing in-country use, generating data results from Marple, as a follow-up to the workshop. So it's really putting the Marple system into use, into practice in those countries, which is great news. So to sum up, we're, thanks to the, you know, extensive surveillance network and all the partners, being able to maintain the large scale surveillance, which, you know, I think is increasingly critical, seeing the rust situation around the world. The Toolbox is really, you know, such a valuable tool for the data management of all of this, and it's an incredible data resource that we've been able to create and maintain. The important races for both stripe rust and stem rust have been detected, I think, very quickly and tracked on a very large scale. Certainly many new variants and many long distance movements that we're seeing. I think national capacity, certainly East Africa, is increasing. I didn't mention in the slides, but there's now a fantastic new greenhouse facility being developed at Kalaro and Njoro in Kenya, which is a great addition to the monitoring network. The advanced early warning forecasting systems, we're now operational, I'd say, Ethiopia and also Nepal, Bangladesh. We're also trying to start things in Kenya. The impact of those systems, I think, is now beginning to appear, and the situation in Ethiopia in 2021 around the incursion of PST-S16 is a good example of that. Also, the vulnerability mapping tool is another, I think, good addition. Those irrigated areas in Ethiopia, I think, need close monitoring and robust control, and great to see the Marple diagnostics now expanding to other countries. So that's a brief summary. Thanks very much for your attention, and I will finish there.